I still remember the sound of my name echoing through that hall, sharp, cold, and unfamiliar. My father didn't call me with love that night, he called me out. The ballroom was glowing, chandeliers, laughter, the smell of champagne, and then silence. Everyone turned toward me as his voice cut through the music. "You've humiliated this family, Elena," he said. Not even a whisper of hesitation. My father, the man who taught me to stand tall, who told me respect was everything, looked at me like I was a stranger who'd dirted his name. I stood there in that red dress he chose for me. My hands were shaking, but I didn't cry. I couldn't, because crying would have made me look weak, and weakness is the one thing my father never forgave. People whispered. Cameras flashed. I heard someone say, "That's Gregory Moore's daughter, the one who ruined her engagement." My mother just lowered her eyes, pretending not to see me. And my brother, my perfect brother Marcus, smirked like he'd been waiting for this moment his whole life. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask why. Why my father would choose his reputation over his own daughter. But I couldn't move. I just stood there, frozen in humiliation, as he turned his back on me, for everyone to see. That was the night I learned something brutal. Respect in my family was never earned by love. It was bought by silence. But I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. Because that same night, I found out he was the one hiding the biggest secret of all. People always said we were the perfect family. The Moors, the kind of people who smiled for magazine covers, who hosted charity galas, who never raised their voices in public. We lived in a house where the silverware gleamed brighter than our smiles, and every word at the dinner table was rehearsed like a speech. To outsiders, my father, Gregory Moore, was the picture of success. A self-made businessman, respected by everyone in town. People admired him, envied him, even. And he loved that. Reputation, he used to say, is what separates the Moors from the rest. I believed him once. At home, that reputation felt like a rulebook I was always breaking without meaning to. My mother, Linda, was gentle but careful. Every sentence measured, every emotion tucked neatly behind her perfect posture. She used to tell me, "Your father has high standards, Elena. You just need to understand how he shows love." But his version of love was like cold marble. Impressive to look at, impossible to feel. And then there was Marcus, my older brother, the golden child. Every parent's dream. Confident, charming, ambitious. My father's reflection, almost down to the way he adjusted his cufflinks before speaking. Marcus never disappoints. My father liked to say during dinner, his tone casual but deliberate. I'd smile anyway, pretending I didn't notice the weight of those words pressing against me. "Of course he doesn't," I'd reply softly, cutting my food in silence while my mother looked away. At family gatherings, people would crowd around Marcus, the future heir to the Moore Empire. They'd ask him about his projects, his investments, his plans. I'd be there too, holding a tray of wine glasses or smiling politely in the corner. Nobody ever asked what I did. Nobody really cared. I worked at a local charity helping single mothers find jobs, something that mattered to me. But to my father, it was just a hobby. "Respect doesn't come from sympathy, Elena," he once told me. "It comes from power." Still, I tried. Every gesture, every compliment, every achievement, I offered it up like a fragile peace offering. But nothing ever seemed enough. The day of Marcus's promotion party, I remember standing by the window, watching the rain blur the city lights. My father raised a toast, his voice full of pride. "To my son, the future of this family's name." Everyone clapped. I smiled, pretending my chest wasn't tightening. I tried to hide behind my glass, but Aunt Valerie noticed. She leaned closer and whispered, "Cheer up, dear. Some of us were born to shine. Others, to support the light." I laughed softly, even though it burned inside. The truth is, I didn't want his company, his money, or his power. I just wanted him to see me, to look at me the way he looked at Marcus, with pride, with certainty, with something that felt like love. But my father's eyes never lingered on me long enough for that. When Daniel, my fiancé, entered our lives, I thought things would finally change. My father liked him instantly. Daniel was polite, ambitious, came from a respectable family. "Finally, a man who understands discipline," my father said approvingly. For the first time, I felt like I'd done something right. Dinner conversations started including me. My father smiled at me in front of guests. My mother even began humming again, as if the air in the house had softened. But beneath that surface calm, something was off. Daniel started spending more time with my father than with me. They had business talks I wasn't invited to. He began using my father's phrases: respect, image, control. And every time I tried to ask what they were discussing, Daniel would smile and say, "You wouldn't understand, Elena. It's just about family." Family. That word used to feel warm. Now, it felt like a locked door. Late one night, I walked past my father's study and heard laughter, his deep, satisfied laugh. I peeked through the half-open door and saw Daniel and Marcus clinking glasses. My father said, "She's emotional, but she'll learn her place." My place. I pressed my back to the wall, trying to breathe. The room spun, but I didn't make a sound. Because in this family, pain had to be silent, just like respect had to be earned. I went to my room and looked at my reflection in the mirror. My makeup was perfect, my smile practiced, my eyes empty. For a moment, I almost convinced myself it didn't matter. That if I just stayed quiet, things would get better. That maybe love could grow from obedience. But deep down, something was breaking. Quietly, steadily, beyond repair. The next morning, my father announced a family dinner to clear the air about the engagement rumors. Everyone smiled, but my stomach sank. Because I knew, when my father called for a family dinner, it was never about peace. It was about control. And this time, I could feel something dark waiting beneath that perfect tablecloth. The night of the family dinner, the air felt heavier than usual. The house smelled of roasted lamb and expensive wine, the kind of meal my father reserved for moments that required discipline through dignity. I knew something was wrong the moment I stepped into the dining room. My father was at the head of the table, Marcus on his right, Daniel beside him. My mother sat quietly at the far end, her eyes downcast. Aunt Valerie was already gossiping in hushed tones, her earrings catching the light like tiny daggers. "Elena," my father said without looking up, "you're late." "I had to take a call from the charity board," I replied softly. He exhaled sharply, the way people do when they are disappointed but too proud to say it aloud. "Charity doesn't pay the bills, dear. You should know that by now." Everyone chuckled, even Daniel. That hurt more than I expected. Dinner began with the usual small talk: Marcus's new investment, my father's latest contract, Aunt Valerie's obsession with status updates. I sat there, swirling the wine in my glass, waiting for someone to ask about my day. No one did. Then, halfway through, my father cleared his throat. "Let's address the rumors," he said, his tone suddenly hard. "The town is talking about your broken engagement, Elena." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. I glanced at Daniel, but he kept his eyes on his plate. My father continued, "Mr. Ross has informed me of certain behavioral issues. Emotional instability, unreliability, and, most importantly, a lack of respect for our family name." Aunt Valerie gasped dramatically. "Oh, Gregory, that must have been so embarrassing for you." I felt my face heat up. "Behavioral issues," I said quietly. "That's not true." My father's eyes met mine, sharp and cold. "So he's lying?" "Yes," I whispered. "He's lying." Daniel finally looked up, his voice smooth. "Elena, maybe it's best if you admit you overreacted. Your temper." "My temper." I cut in. My voice trembled, but I couldn't stop. "You humiliated me, Daniel. You ended our engagement over gossip you heard from my aunt." The room fell silent. Only the ticking of the antique clock filled the space. My father leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "Enough," he said. "You've done enough damage." "Damage?" My words came out in a whisper. "I'm the one who's been lied about, insulted, ignored." "Enough." His voice boomed, making my mother flinch. "You think you've been mistreated? You embarrass yourself in public, disrespect this family's name, and now you want sympathy." Tears burned my eyes, but I held them back. "All I ever wanted was for you to believe me." Marcus laughed under his breath. "Dad, she's doing it again, turning everything into a drama." I turned to him, my voice breaking. "Why do you always enjoy watching me fall, Marcus?" "Because you make it so easy," he said with a smirk. That was it. Something inside me cracked, not from anger, but from exhaustion. I'd spent my whole life trying to be enough for them, and all they saw was a disappointment. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping the floor. You've all made your choice, I said, my voice shaking. But I won't sit here and be your entertainment anymore. As I turned to leave, my father's words stopped me cold. Don't forget, he said, you carry my name. Whatever you do out there reflects on me. So if you want to keep what little dignity you have left, stay quiet. I froze. That wasn't a warning, it was a threat. And then Daniel's phone buzzed on the table. A message flashed briefly on the screen before he flipped it over. I caught a glimpse of it, just one line that made my stomach drop. Payment confirmed. He'll keep his mouth shut. My father saw me looking and quickly reached for the phone. For the first time, his calm expression faltered. I stared at him, realizing something was very, very wrong. Who, I asked quietly, is supposed to keep his mouth shut? No one answered. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. And in that heavy, suffocating silence, I knew. The man I'd spent my whole life defending had a secret. One that could destroy the very reputation he'd chosen over me. After that dinner, something shifted in the house. The silence grew sharper, colder, the kind that didn't just fill rooms, it filled hearts. My father barely spoke to me, except when issuing orders through my mother. Tell Elena to stay out of public events for now, he'd say, as if I couldn't hear him from across the hall. Aunt Valerie pretended to be sympathetic, but her words were daggers wrapped in lace. You should be grateful, dear, she said once, pouring herself tea. Your father's saving you from more embarrassment. Everyone's still talking about how Daniel handled things with such grace. Grace. That word felt like poison. Even at the charity office, people looked at me differently. I could feel their eyes on me, not with pity, but with judgment. My father's reputation had always protected me. Now, it was the weapon used against me. Then came Marcus's engagement party, a grand event at the family estate, glittering with lights and self-importance. My father insisted I attend, to show the town we're still united. But unity, in our family, meant obedience. When I arrived, every conversation stopped for a heartbeat. Whispers followed me like a shadow. There she is. The daughter who ruined her engagement. Poor Mr. Moore, imagine the shame. I smiled politely, holding my head high even though I could feel my pulse in my throat. Marcus and his fiancée, Claire, were surrounded by photographers. My father posed proudly beside them, his hand resting on Marcus's shoulder, the image of a proud patriarch. Then his eyes found me. Elena, he said loudly, summoning me forward. Everyone turned. Why don't you say a few words for your brother? He's done what you couldn't, brought honor to this family. The laughter was polite, but it burned like fire. My lips trembled. Congratulations, Marcus, I managed to say. I'm sure father couldn't be prouder. Marcus smirked. Don't worry, Elena. You'll find someone, maybe a man who can handle your emotions. A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. My father didn't stop them. He laughed too. That's when something inside me snapped, not enough to make a scene, but enough to make a promise. I smiled faintly, masking the ache in my chest. Oh, I already have someone handling my emotions, I said quietly. Myself. Then I walked away before the tears could escape. Later that night, I sat alone on the garden bench, staring at the fountain light shimmering across the water. My mother approached, her steps hesitant. You shouldn't provoke your father, she whispered. He's under stress. There's business pressure you don't understand. Business pressure? I asked. Is that what you call it when he pays people to stay quiet? Her eyes widened, a flash of fear I'd never seen before. Elena, where did you hear that? I hesitated. Daniel's phone. I saw the message. She went pale. You must forget that. Do you understand me? You must not bring this up again. Why, Mom? I demanded. What is he hiding? She looked around as if the garden lights could hear us. It's not your place to ask. Everything your father does, he does for this family. For the family, I repeated bitterly. Or for himself. She didn't answer. She just walked away, shoulders trembling, but her silence louder than any truth. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying her words, her fear, the way my father's eyes flickered when I mentioned the message. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. The next morning, an envelope appeared under my door. No name, no address. Just one line written in neat handwriting. Ask Mrs. Hayes what happened in 1998. Mrs. Hayes. The woman who used to visit my parents when I was a child. I hadn't seen her in years, but I remembered her stories, her gentle voice, the way my father always changed the subject when she spoke of the past. I turned the envelope over in my hands, my pulse racing. The paper smelled faintly of lavender, the same scent Mrs. Hayes always wore. Suddenly, all the pieces I'd been ignoring started to form a pattern. Daniel's silence, my mother's fear, my father's obsession with reputation. Whatever happened in 1998, it was the reason he'd chosen his pride over me. And if I found out the truth, it might destroy everything he'd built. I held the note tightly in my fist, whispering to myself, "All right, Father. You wanted silence. But now, you'll hear my voice." When I finally met Mrs. Hayes, the truth began to unravel like a thread I couldn't stop pulling. She lived in a quiet part of town, surrounded by wilted roses and silence. Her eyes widened when she saw me. "You're Gregory's daughter," she whispered, almost trembling. I nodded. "I need to know what happened in 1998. She hesitated. "Your father was involved in a deal, a development project. It went wrong. Money vanished, investors were ruined. But someone took the blame for him." "Who?" I asked. Her lips tightened. "A man named Robert Hensley. He was your father's partner. He went to prison for the fraud, after your father paid off the witnesses." My heart thudded in my chest. Why would he do that? Because if the truth had come out, your father's reputation would have been destroyed before it ever began. I sat there in silence, the weight of it crushing me. Everything I had ever been blamed for, every word about honor and family name, it was all built on someone else's ruin. When I returned home that night, my father was waiting in the study. He already knew I'd been to see her. "Curiosity," he said quietly, swirling a glass of whiskey, "is a dangerous thing, Elena." "You lied to everyone," I said. "You let a man go to prison for your crimes." His expression didn't change. "I did what I had to do. That's how power works. That's how survival works." "Survival?" I spat. "You call that survival? You destroyed a man's life. And now you're trying to destroy mine," he snapped. "After everything I've given you." "Given me?" My voice broke. "You've given me nothing but shame." He slammed his glass on the table. "Then maybe it's time you learn what real shame feels like." The next morning, everything changed. I woke to my mother's voice calling me downstairs. The living room was filled with relatives, Marcus, Aunt Valerie, even a few board members from my father's company. Everyone looked grave. My father stood by the fireplace, holding a stack of papers. "Elena," he began, his tone smooth but poisonous, "I've made a decision for the good of the family." He handed me an envelope. Inside was a legal document, cold, official, devastating. Effective immediately, Elena Moore is to be removed from all family trusts and business inheritances. My breath caught. "You're disinheriting me." He didn't blink. "Actions have consequences." Aunt Valerie folded her arms smugly. "It's for the best, dear. You've caused enough drama." I turned to my mother, begging her with my eyes. She said nothing. Just pressed her hand to her pearls and looked away. Marcus couldn't hide his grin. "You always said you didn't care about money, didn't you, Lena? Guess you finally got your wish." Something inside me shattered. "I never wanted your money," I whispered, voice trembling. "I just wanted to belong here." My father stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You made your choice the moment you questioned me. You wanted independence? Congratulations. You're on your own." I stood there, surrounded by family, yet utterly alone. My knees almost gave out, but I refused to fall. Not in front of them. Not in front of him. As I turned to leave, he added coldly, "From this day forward, you are not to use the Moore name for any personal or professional purpose. That name is an honor, one you no longer deserve." That word, deserve, cut deeper than anything else. I walked out of that mansion with nothing but my car keys and the clothes on my back. The door closed behind me like a verdict. 4 days, I didn't eat. I barely spoke. I stayed in a small motel outside town, watching rain drip down the window like slow tears. The world I'd been raised to worship, the house, the parties, the family dinners, all felt like a lie I'd been too blind to see. At night, I replayed his voice in my head. "That name is an honor." No, I thought. It's a stain. But under all that pain, something else started to grow, something fierce, quiet, and sharp. I thought of Robert Hensley, the man who'd lost everything for my father's lies. I thought of Daniel, who'd betrayed me for his approval. And I thought of the town, the people who still bowed to my father's reputation. I realized then, the only thing more powerful than the truth he buried was the truth I could reveal. My humiliation had turned to clarity. My grief to purpose. He took my name, my place, my dignity, but he couldn't take my voice. I stared into the mirror of that dim motel room and whispered to myself. He built his empire on silence. I'll bring it down with truth. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of my father anymore. It's strange how silence can teach you more than words ever could. In the weeks after my father erased me, I stopped crying. The grief hardened into something sharper, something I could use. At first, I drifted like a ghost. No home. No family. Just a name I wasn't allowed to speak. But pain, when it settles long enough, starts whispering ideas. And my pain whispered one thing, over and over: expose him. I began with what little I had, the note about 1998 and Mrs. Hayes's confession. I spent nights at the public library, scrolling through old news archives. My father's name appeared in glowing headlines, but beneath the praise, I found small mentions: an unresolved investigation, a vanished witness, missing financial records. The clues were faint, but they were there, like fingerprints on glass. I made copies, notes, timelines. Every lie had a pattern. Every cover-up, a paper trail. When I visited Mrs. Hayes again, she hesitated at first. "Elena," she said softly, "you don't know what you're getting into. Your father isn't just a businessman, he's protected by powerful people." "I know," I said. "That's why the truth has to come from inside the family. From someone he can't silence." She looked at me with pity. "You're brave, or you're doomed." "Maybe both," I replied. That night, I reached out to the only person who'd ever believed me, my cousin Nora. She was younger, impulsive, and secretly despised my father's arrogance. When I told her everything, she didn't flinch. "So you're planning to ruin him?" she asked, leaning forward. "I'm planning to free myself," I said. Nora grinned. "Same thing." Together, we built a plan, not for revenge in the usual sense, but for exposure. The annual Moore Foundation Gala was coming up, the biggest event of the year, streamed online, attended by every elite family in the city. My father would be on stage, giving his usual speech about honor, legacy, and truth. And that's where the real truth would finally speak. Over the next few weeks, we gathered proof. Nora used her job at a law firm to access public filings. I tracked down old partners who'd worked with my father. One man, a retired accountant, agreed to meet in a dusty diner on the edge of town. "He made me sign false audit papers," the man said quietly. "I kept copies, just in case. Never thought I'd see the day someone asked about them." When he handed me the folder, my hands trembled. Inside were balance sheets, bank statements, and correspondence, letters between my father and officials he'd bribed decades ago. It wasn't just business fraud. It was corruption on a level that would destroy him. Still, doubt crept in. One night, staring at the evidence spread across my motel bed, I whispered to myself, what if I become like him? What if revenge turns me into the same kind of monster? The silence answered me back. Truth isn't revenge, it's release. I decided then, I wouldn't destroy him out of hate. I would expose him out of justice. For Robert Hensley, for my mother's fear, and for the girl I used to be, the one who thought silence was respect. Nora helped me create an anonymous email account and a secure drive to store everything. We sent copies to 3 news outlets and scheduled the files to go public the night of the gala. But I wasn't done yet. I needed to face him. Because exposing him behind his back wasn't enough, he needed to see who'd finally stood up to him. The week of the gala, I returned to the city. Every step I took felt heavier, but sharper. I bought a simple black dress, not for glamour, but for power. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. Her eyes were calm. Her voice was steady. The girl who once trembled at her father's disapproval was gone. That morning, I sent him a message, short, cold, deliberate. "I'll be attending the gala. Don't worry, father. I won't embarrass you. I'll just tell the truth." No reply came, but I knew he'd read it. At sunset, The city lights flickered across the skyline like fire waiting to spread. I stood outside the Moore estate, hearing the faint hum of laughter and music from inside. The same people who'd once watched me crumble were there again, unaware that tonight, the story would finally change. I took a deep breath. My heart was racing, but I didn't feel afraid. Fear had burned away long ago, replaced by something colder: conviction. I clutched the flash drive in my hand, the one that held every secret, every buried lie. This isn't about revenge, I whispered to myself. It's about truth. The valet opened the door, and I stepped out under the glittering lights, head high. Somewhere inside, my father was preparing to deliver his grand speech. And somewhere deep in me, a storm was waiting to break. The Moore Foundation gala glittered brighter than ever that night, chandeliers like constellations, music floating over a sea of gowns and tuxedos. It was everything my father loved: admiration, applause, control. And this time, he believed he had it all back. I stood at the edge of the ballroom, blending with the crowd. No one noticed me, just the quiet daughter who'd faded from family photos. But tonight, I wasn't invisible. Tonight, I was the truth in disguise. Across the room, my father stood on the stage, his voice booming with practiced pride. "For decades," he declared, "the Moore family has stood for integrity, for trust, for honor." Every word was a blade twisting in the lie. Beside him sat Marcus and Aunt Valerie, their smiles polished, their arrogance shining. My mother lingered near the back, eyes down, like a woman too tired to pretend. I felt Nora's hand brush mine, a silent cue. The flash drive was ready. The projector linked. The files queued to play on command. I took one last breath, steadying my heartbeat. Then I stepped forward. My heels clicked against the marble floor, sharp, deliberate. Heads turned. Conversations stilled. The room seemed to hold its breath. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice clear through the mic I'd taken from the host stand. "I'm Elena Moore. You might remember me as the daughter who," I glanced at my father, "embarrassed this family." A ripple of murmurs ran through the crowd. My father's face tightened, but his voice stayed smooth. "Elena, this isn't the time. Please, sit down." "Oh, but it is," I replied. "Because for years, you've told this town about respect and honor. Tonight, I think they deserve to know what those words really cost." The screen behind him flickered to life. At first just old headlines, then letters, documents, bank statements. The room darkened as the projector's glow painted my father's face pale. "What is this?" he barked, stepping forward. "The truth," I said. Then the audio began, a recording Mrs. Hayes had given me. My father's voice, unmistakable, cold and calculated. "Pay Hensley off. Make him disappear. The company can't survive another scandal. No one must ever know." Gasps erupted across the ballroom. Cameras flashed. My father lunged toward the stage controls, but Nora was faster. She locked the laptop with a keystroke, the recording echoing through the hall. He turned on me, his composure cracking. "You don't know what you're doing." "Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing," I said, my voice trembling but steady. "You taught me what humiliation feels like. You taught me silence. Tonight, I'm teaching you truth." Marcus shot up from his chair. "You can't destroy him like this. He's your father." I looked at him, the brother who'd laughed at my pain. He stopped being my father when he destroyed everyone else for his pride. The audience buzzed with shock. People whispered, recording, capturing every moment. My father's voice thundered again, desperate now. "This is defamation. I built this empire for all of you. For all of us," I said softly. "Or just for you?" For a moment, the only sound was the faint hiss of the projector. The man who'd spent his life commanding rooms now stood small under the weight of his own lies. My mother's voice broke through the silence. "Gregory, is it true?" He turned to her, but she didn't look away this time. Her hands trembled, her voice rising. "Tell them. Tell your children what you did." He couldn't. His mouth opened, then closed, as if words had finally abandoned him. Aunt Valerie tried to intervene. "Linda, stop." "Stop," my mother snapped, tears streaking her makeup. "I've stopped for 25 years. I've stopped defending myself, stopped questioning, stopped breathing. All for his so-called honor. No more." Her cry rippled through the room like thunder. The crowd began to murmur louder, journalists, investors, family friends, all realizing the man they worshipped was a fraud. Someone shouted, "Call the board." Another whispered, "He's finished." My father's shoulders slumped. "You've destroyed me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I stepped closer. "No, father. You destroyed yourself. I just showed everyone what was already there." The microphone caught every syllable, every tremor in my voice. He stared at me for a long moment, and for the first time in my life, I saw something break inside him. Not anger, not rage, but shame. The lights from the cameras flashed like judgment. The music had long stopped. The perfect Moore image lay shattered at his feet. I turned to the crowd. "You all wanted to know what integrity looks like. It's not hiding behind a name. It's facing the truth, even when it burns." And then, softly, I placed the microphone down on the podium. The hall was silent except for the heavy breathing of a man finally stripped of every mask. I walked off the stage, my heels echoing against the marble once more, the same sound as before, but this time, it wasn't fear that carried me forward. It was freedom. As I reached the exit, I looked back just once. My father stood there, surrounded by people, yet utterly alone, the same way I'd once been. And in that moment, I felt no triumph, no gloating, just peace. The kind that comes when truth finally breathes. The doors closed behind me, sealing the past in that glittering tomb of lies. The next morning, the world felt still. No noise. No shouting. No pretense. Just silence, deep, heavy, almost sacred. I sat by the motel window again, watching the sunrise spill across the glass. The sky looked cleaner somehow, as if the world had finally exhaled after holding its breath too long. My phone buzzed nonstop, messages from reporters, lawyers, relatives, people who'd once ignored me now desperate to talk. I didn't reply to any of them. For the first time in my life, I didn't owe anyone an explanation. By noon, every news outlet carried the same headline. Gregory Moore exposed, fraud, cover-ups, and family scandal. The image beneath it was the one burned in my memory, my father frozen on stage, eyes hollow, as the empire he built on lies began to crumble. Marcus released a statement that afternoon, distancing himself from the actions of his father. Aunt Valerie vanished from social media. Sponsors withdrew, board members resigned, the company's name stripped from its glass tower downtown. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel guilt either. Just peace, quiet, hard-earned peace. Still, I went to see him. The Moore mansion looked smaller than I remembered, stripped of its shine. Reporters swarmed the gates, but I slipped through the side entrance, the one my mother used when she didn't want to be seen crying. I found him in the study, the same place where it all began. He was sitting in the dark, the curtains drawn, his desk bare except for a single photograph. Me and Marcus as children, standing beside him, all smiles. When he looked up, I barely recognized him. His hair had gone gray overnight. His voice was thin. "Elena," he whispered, as if saying my name for the first time. I stood in the doorway, unsure whether to speak or just turn and leave. But then I remembered, this wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about closure. "I didn't come here to hurt you," I said quietly. "That part's over." He stared at me, his eyes glassy. "You've ruined me." I shook my head. "No, father. You ruined yourself. I just stopped pretending." He leaned back, sighing. "You could have come to me. We could have handled this privately." I laughed softly, not out of cruelty, but disbelief. "Privately? Like you handled Robert Hensley? Like you handled me?" He looked down. "You don't understand. Everything I did was for this family." "I am your family," I said, my voice breaking. "But you never saw me. You only saw your reflection, and anything that didn't shine, you erased." He didn't answer. The silence stretched between us, not angry this time, just empty. Finally, he asked, almost pleading, "Do you hate me?" I took a slow breath. "No," I said. "I pity you." He looked up, startled. "Because you spent your whole life protecting a name," I continued. "And you lost everything real because of it." I turned to leave, but stopped at the door. "You once told me that the Moore name is an honor. But the truth is, honor isn't something you inherit, it's something you earn." He didn't move. Didn't call me back. Just sat there, drowning in the silence that used to belong to me. As I walked out of that mansion, the cold morning air hit my face like freedom. Weeks passed. The scandal consumed the town for a while, then slowly faded, like all stories eventually do. The Moore Empire was dismantled, sold piece by piece to repay debts. Marcus disappeared into another city. Aunt Valerie became a ghost of gossip. My mother left quietly, renting a small apartment by the coast. And me? I started over. I moved to a smaller town, far from the whispers, and reopened the charity program I'd once worked for. Except this time, it carried a new name, the Hensley Foundation. It wasn't about revenge. It was about making something right again. One evening, as I was locking up the office, Nora called. "So," she asked playfully, "do you feel like you won?" I smiled faintly. "No," I said. "It's not about winning. It's about ending." She was quiet for a moment. "He'll never recover, you know." "I know," I replied. "But neither will I, not in the same way. I'll recover differently." When I hung up, I stood there for a while, watching the sunset burn across the horizon, the same fire that once consumed me now lighting the way forward. That night, I wrote one final note in my journal. Sometimes, dignity isn't about forgiveness or revenge. It's about choosing truth when silence is easier. It's about walking away, not because you've given up, but because you've finally learned your worth.